Hello ladies and gentlemen, Coldar here. Today we are looking at a guide to Primordius from Throne of Thunder. So this fight is really quite easy, actually. One of the easiest in the zone, aside from Jinruk the Breaker, the very first guy. So it will kind of feel very chaotic, but there really is not a lot that can kill you outright as long as you have stable healing. Fairly smart tanks and just DPS that can self-manage their own actions, basically, which we'll talk about in a moment. So let's go ahead and get started. So raid composition is pretty standard once again. You'll want 2 healers, 2 tanks. You can arguably do 3 healers, but there really isn't that much damage to heal, so 2 should be plenty fine. Assuming you know what you're doing, and arguably you don't even have to really know what you're doing. it's just kind of chaotic, but it'll come together. So yeah, just 2 tanks, 2 healers. So the basic mechanic here is that Primordius is heavily mutated with the Mutated Abomination debuff throughout the fight. This means that he will not take more than 25% of normal damage from most sources throughout the fight, and therefore you need to utilize the living fluid that will constantly stream from the pools on the outside of the room to allow yourself to also become mutated, and once you become fully mutated, you can then do normal damage to him and actually kill him in a reasonable time. So that's the basic goal here, and as you can see, living fluid just continuously stream out of everywhere. So, like I said, it feels very chaotic, but in reality, it's not too difficult to manage once you get used to the basic mechanics here. There are 2 basic tank mechanics here that sort of require the tank swap, as it were. The first is Primordial Strike, and this one is not really necessary for tank swap, but it's just a big damaging hit. It does 600,000 physical damage to anyone in front of the caster, so it's a cleave attack, good old cleave. So this just means that you need to make sure that the current tank is the only player in front of Primordius during the entire fight. And that's not too difficult to do, just be aware of his facing and stay behind him or to his side. The other main ability for tanks is the Malformed Blood. And this is a stacking debuff. It's used very frequently on the current tank. It lasts a minute, and it does 10,000 nature damage, or 20,000 nature damage every 3 seconds to the current target per stack. However, in addition to that, it also adds the Congeal Blood stack to the tank, which allows them to do 20,000 nature damage every time they do a melee attack on a blood. So basically, every stack increases damage taken by the tank from the dot, but also allows them to do a lot more DPS to the living fluid that are all around the platform. So your tanks can use this to their advantage to really help out on the adds when they're not directly tanking the boss. And by doing this, your tanks can really be the primary source of living fluid death outside of the initial start period, which we'll talk about in a moment. But otherwise, just manage that stack count to a reasonable level. You obviously don't want the stack to get so high that your healers can't keep up with the damage, but you also want enough stacks that your tanks can do decent damage to the fluid when they're not on the boss. So experiment a bit and see what's comfortable for you. So this fight, while it does have a berserk timer on its own, its sort of soft and rage mechanic is Primordius evolving. So as he soaks up living fluids, pools on the ground, and just through his natural rate of gaining energy, he will gain full energy and become evolved. Every time he gains full energy and evolves, he gains a stack of the evolution buff, which increases his damage by 10% per stack, so all damage he deals. And he also will gain a mutation, which is one of 6 possible mutation effects. Each of these, vary, but in other words, just make the fight more difficult. Now, he cannot have more than 3 mutations at any given time. So once he's evolved 3 times and he has 3 different mutations, the 4th time he evolves, he will lose the first mutation he gained and instead pick another one randomly. So this sort of changes how the fight plays out a little bit every time he evolves. Generally speaking, it's all some form of damage that you have to heal, but how you actually deal with it can vary a little bit. So we'll just briefly go through each of those and how you deal with them on a case-by-case basis. So the first mutation possible is acidic spines, and this one is pretty basic to deal with. Just keep your raids spread out at least 5 yards or more from each other. Obviously, melee may not be able to do that as they're moving around, but everyone else can do so. And this will do about 100,000 nature damage to anyone it targets within 5 yards of that player. So just stay spread and you can mitigate a lot of this damage. Second is erupting pustules, and this is probably the most deadly of the mutation effects, so the one you have to worry about the most. Basically, it sends out a pustule every 10 seconds that sort of land on a random area of the room, and if you get hit by it, it does heavy AE damage to any player within a few yards of it. So it's technically avoidable, but there's so much going on in the fight, it's difficult to see at all times. So again, just like the acidic spines, staying spread out is the best defense against this mutation. And then just strong healing to recover any lost health so that spike damage won't kill anybody. Third, we have gas bladder, and this causes a AE indicated by a ring about 20 yards out from Primordius. And when he completes the cast, it does heavy nature damage to anyone within it, but it splits the damage up. So ideally, you want everyone in your raid to briefly step into that circle as indicated on the ground to help soak up this damage. If you don't have enough players in that ring, things will be very dangerous for your tanks or few melee that happen to be there. But generally speaking, if you have 2 tanks in there, 1 or 2 melee, and then just anyone else that can be close, so for example, I'm usually staying within a few yards, then this damage is not very deadly, and you should be okay. So if your raid can stay spread out, but step into it briefly when that gas bladder goes off, it shouldn't be much trouble. Metabolic boost is basic. It just causes Primordius to attack faster and uses abilities more frequently. So nothing you can do about it. Just be aware that if he has that, other stuff will be slightly more dangerous than it was before. Pathogen glands is really the only single target effect that you will know about, and it's probably the most healing intensive one for a single player. Essentially, it debuffs that player for 10 seconds, and they'll take 100,000 damage per second over the duration. So just make sure your healers have some clear indication of when someone gets that effect, and they can keep that player topped off. So, for example, I just have a clear indicator on my grid when that happens, and then we just have one of our healers assigned to healing that player. So there it's on our hunter, and I'm just kind of spamming him a bit to keep him topped off there. So just watch for that, and obviously as a player, use a personal cooldown if you get that effect, since it's only a 10-second duration. And then the final mutation possible is ventral sacs. Again, this one's very basic. In fact, it's similar to metabolic boost in that you can't prevent the damage in any way, so you just have to deal with it. But it doesn't do very much. It's just AE damage to everyone in the raid while it's up. It's about 20,000 nature damage every second. So very minor amount, and just let mostly HOTS deal with this damage, and you shouldn't really have to worry about anything else. So it's one of the better ones to actually get. If you could get ventral sacs and metabolic boost at the same time, things are looking great. You really won't have much to deal with at all. So now let's talk about living fluid and player mutation. So as mentioned at the beginning, the basic idea is for players to mutate. Once they're fully mutated, they can do normal 100% damage to Primordius and kill him in a reasonable time period. So the way you do this is by killing living fluid. Every time you kill a living fluid, it will either spawn a mutagenic pool, which just looks like a little red pool where it died, and this will happen most of the time. And in rare occasion, it will instead spawn a volatile pool, which looks like a purple pool. You can see some on the bottom left there. So when a player steps in a volatile pool, the purple one, it will give the player a negative mutation. So basically it does damage to them, and they get some harmful debuff. And there's a variety of those. But basically it lowers their effectiveness in some way. Similarly, if Primordius is allowed to step into a volatile pool on a purple pool, he will gain full mutation, so he'll go up to max and evolve again. In addition, he will also heal for 10% of his health. So very bad for Primordius to step into a purple pool. Because of this, the basic pattern for moving Primordius should be around the edge of the room, just in one direction the whole time, as you see we're doing here. That way, the chances for living fluid to die in front of his path is that much lower, and the chances, therefore, for him to step into a volatile pool is very unlikely. So, just try to keep this pattern going and make sure your tanks are aware of where possible pools can come up and move him around them if you're approaching a purple pool. So, when a player kills a living fluid and it leaves behind a mutagenic pool, if a player steps into this and they don't have any mutation on them, or they're not fully mutated already, they will gain a stacking variety of helpful buffs, basically. So the one they gain is random, but essentially it'll give them increased stats, or mastery, or haste, or crit, and helps them in some way. It also does a little bit of damage when they step in one, just to give your healers something to do. But generally speaking, everyone in your raid, save for perhaps your healers, should try to get stacks of the mutagenic pool buff and work toward that fully mutated state. Now, when a player gets 5 total beneficial buffs on them, they become fully mutated. Once they're fully mutated, this state lasts for 2 minutes, and as I mentioned before, they can do full damage to Primordius during this time. So the basic goal here is for all your DPS to get 5 mutagenic pools on them in a row. Once they're at 5, they completely avoid mutagenic pools from that point forward while they're fully mutated. Because if they get another pool after fully mutated, it will be a harmful debuff, and you don't want that. So once you're mutated, attack the boss for 2 minutes. Once that 2 minutes is up and you lost your fully mutation, then you want to kill living fluid again, regain 5 more stacks from mutagenic pools, become fully mutated once more, and go back on the boss. And you repeat this process over and over. So, as mentioned, your tank that is not on Primordius will have stacks that will help them kill living fluid. So players can generally look behind the boss or in some designated area for pools that are on the ground. But your DPS can also take it upon themselves to kill living fluid when they need to get 5 more stacks again. Pretty basic stuff. And it's kind of simple just to keep this pattern going throughout the rest of the fight. Obviously, as Primordius gains more stacks, his damage will go up, so it's sort of a softened range as mentioned. But generally speaking, your DPS players can be left to their own devices to handle the stacks. Now you may notice at the beginning of the fight, we sort of had designated markers so that DPS were split up and could therefore get the living fluid as it was coming into the center of the room where Primordius starts out. Once everyone is sort of mutated or close to it, then blow your Bloodlust and all your cooldowns and take advantage of everyone being mutated at the same time. And then from that point forward, you can just manage your own buffs as you see fit. So pretty basic. Just get up to the 5 stack, DPS Primordius, don't get an extra stack or you'll get harmful debuffs, and then reapply another 5 stack once your mutation falls off. So I think that covers everything. You can see it again. It appears more chaotic than it actually is. So just have solid healing, keep everyone topped off from the random miscellaneous mutation effects, and then just have DPS self-manage their fully mutation buffs and all that good stuff. I should mention that the beneficial things are all magic-based, so you cannot dispel as a healer. So just be aware that you may be tempted to dispel because you see these things on players, but they're generally helpful. So as long as players don't get the negative ones when they don't want them, then you shouldn't have any reason to actually manually dispel a player. So, good luck on Primordius, and thanks for watching.